So I've defined a bunch of models here today, or tonight. We're going to spend some time going through all of the effects. Last week we talked about how to create a sequence. We talked about all the windows in the sequencer, etc. Today we're going to go through and show you some of the effects. We won't touch on all of them. There's a couple that we won't touch on because we might come back to them later. There's a few that I actually might point you off to some videos that are on the Facebook page, which you should really go and watch to get a good understanding of. So for instance, when we get to the faces effect, we can cover the faces effect, but I've got to say there are actually some really, really good videos out there on the faces effect. I don't know how well the Sydney Mini one that Logan did turned out, but he did a really good job of explaining it there. But there's also a couple of others that are out there. Sean's done some good ones as well that are all worthwhile going and watching if you really want to get your hang of the hands on that. Okay, so let's start. We went through all of this last week. I'll just set up one without audio. We'll come back and do an audio one when we get to some of the effects that require music, but most don't. You'll remember last week we have to edit our display elements. We're going to add a view. I don't know, V1, unimaginative. We're going to go and add all our controls in. We'll add our timing track in. Done. And we'll just set some timing marks up so that we can drop things in. Roughly 5 seconds. Whoa! Wasn't very clever. All right. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to get rid of is this effects window because it adds no value. Everything you want is up here. For those that find those icons that are a little bit small, you can actually come up here to the tool icon size and you can make them a bit bigger. Saves sort of squinting and trying to read what they say. We'll get rid of the effect assistant as well. It'll come back if we need it. Okay, so we'll start left to right. And we'll talk through each of them. I'm going to start by showing each effect on a matrix, and I do that because fundamentally almost every effect actually renders like it's a matrix, and then when you drop it on different models, it's really just in some way distorting that model to look like either a matrix, or it may be a matrix that's just 1 pixel high, so it's actually like a line, but effectively that's what it's doing. So let's start with the off effect. Not surprisingly, the off effect does absolutely nothing. There's absolutely no options, but it can be useful if you want to blank out another effect. So if I drop the butterfly effect on there and I've got the off effect, you can't see the butterfly. And now what will happen is you'll see the butterfly, it'll disappear for a little while and it will come back. So there aren't many circumstances where you'd want to use the off effect, but if you do ever need to blank something out, it can be useful sometimes to just throw it in a layer to hide something that's underneath it. So that's the simple one. Then we have the on effect, which not surprisingly is exactly the opposite. The on effect takes the first color that you select up here. So I got white selected, now red's the first color selected. If I deselect red, now green's it, and that's what shows up in the on effect. The on effect can also be used for color ramps. So you can say, I want to start at black and come to full intensity. You can also, of course, do exactly the opposite, and it will start full and then fade away. I'm going to get this wrong. I think it's if you select a cell and press the D key, it does a ramp down, and I think if you press the U key, it lowercase u and lowercase d, it's a shortcut. If you select multiple cells and press U, it will put that on all of them. So it's a bit of a quick way if you're just doing on and it's an O that does just a straight on effect. So some shortcut keys if you're doing it, particularly if you're down sequencing single channels or single strings, and and you're used to doing things the old LOR way, etc. That can be a useful alternative way to do it. All right. The only other thing, so if you are doing a ramp, not a ripple, but a ramp, there's also a cycle count, and that just causes it to do that ramp over and over and over again within that time interval. So this is going to do it 7.2 times within that time interval.
Okay, Keith, Jeff's got a question. Yep. With the shortcut key,
yes,
show it if you hover over the effect.
Does it show you the shortcut key? No. So if you're really unsure about your shortcut keys, let me just save this.
Yeah, I downloaded it off the Nutcracker site the other day. It's giving you a one-page printout, I think it was.
Yeah, so I'm not sure why it's not in this folder, but let me go to another one. Normally what it does, and I don't know under what circumstances it does this, but you'll see a file inside your folder called key bindings, XLights_keybindings.xml. And if you take a look at it actually tells you what all the shortcuts are. Okay, so the on is, and this is all very, very cryptic. This is exactly how XLights stores things behind the scenes. But yeah, these are all the ones that are defined. So according to this, if I type a Y, I'm going to get a butterfly. If I type an F, I'm going to get a fire. In theory, you can add your own. Generally speaking, if you just add the effect equals with the name, it will just put that effect on with its default parameters. Here, what they're doing is actually putting some underlying parameters on that particular effect. This is also where your timing and your split and all that sort of stuff is. So your plus and your minus, you zoom in and zoom out. So.
Excellent.
Stop chatting for a second so I can get to my minimize button. Got it. All right. Okay, so that's the on effect. So on effect is used just to display a single color. You can apply it at any level. You can go down to the string level or the node level and apply the on effects there, and you can do the ramp ups and the ramp down. It's not the only way to do ramps. There are many other ways to do ramps. That's just one of them. Okay, so now we've got the bars effect. The bars effect, you need at least 2 colors selected. As you can see, it just moves bars across the model. Okay, the number of bars you have is governed up here by the number of colors that you select. Something that some people don't think about is sometimes, so for instance, the palette repetitions here defines the number of bars that I get. If that's not enough for you, let's say we're just doing red and green, and you think that's really frustrating. I actually want more than 10 or 5 red and 5 green. You can always come in here and say, well, actually, I'll make that red as well, and I'll make that green as well. Right, and then I'll select those as well, and now I've got 20. Right, so you're not as constrained by that 5 as you might think you are. If you play with the colors, you can actually drive the number of bars up to higher numbers. And then the cycles allows you to control the speed. So the more cycles you have, a cycle is considered to be one slide up of the bars all the way to the top. So if you set the cycles to 0, the bars don't move at all. Once you start to move it, now it's going to go up 4.3 times within that 5-second interval. So hopefully that's clear. If I set that back to something more reasonable, there's value curves on these two parameters. So the value curve on the repetitions lets me do things like change the number of bars over the course of the effect. So you can see that the bars are multiplying and start small and it gets more and more. Yeah, okay, it didn't start at 0. That's why it wasn't as dramatic as I thought it was going to be. So very few bars, and then you can see how it changes over the course of the effect. To be honest, I don't know how often you'd use that particular one. The cycles using a value curve here can let you accelerate it. Well, it gets a little bit out of hand, but basically it's starting slow and then it's accelerating through the duration of the effect. It's probably accelerating a little bit too far. We might want to lower that down a bit. Start it at 0. So start slow and then it accelerates. Slow and accelerates. So you can do that with the value curve. You can control the direction. There's a whole bunch of different ones here. Up, down, as you'd expect, the usual left and rights. There's also expand, which comes out of a center point, and below it you can control where that center point is. So here the center point's now right down the bottom of the model. This is really useful if you've got, if we come back here and we add some single line effects. Oops, I didn't want to do that. Sorry, if we go up here, and we'll create a single line effect, and another single line effect. Right, and we'll add a group. Remember, I'm using the next version, so this looks a little bit different than it probably does on yours. I'll call this my roof line. I will throw my 3 single lines in there. We'll save that. We'll go back to our sequencer. We'll edit our display elements. We'll add our roof line in. Done. Okay, so there's our roof line there. We'll go up and we'll grab that bars effect again. Okay. What we're going to do is we'll do a horizontal expand. And so what we can do, if we're clever, is we can set it so that it looks like it's expanding off the point of your roof. So if your house is not perfectly symmetrical and you'd want to use the bars effect and have the bars sort of spread out from a point, then moving the center point lets you decide what that center point is that you want it to expand from. So hopefully that makes sense. The opposite of that, of course, is to compress. So here it's compressing up to the peak on the roof. Let's go back to our matrix. And then you've got alternate up and down. So we need to slow this down. This is looking way too slow. So I think it's just alternating the bars between red and green backwards and forwards. Right, so rather than sliding, it's just swapping the colors back and forward, and alternate down is the other way. It's kind of hard to tell it because of the size here and the speed. Yeah, it's going up and it's just alternating it. I don't know. I must admit I've never used alternate left, right, etc. What else have we got? Okay, so then you can do things like you can put gradients in. So gradients basically blend the bars together. So you go from a center point that's definitely green to a center point that's red, and it just blends the colors across those. Let's freeze them for a second. You can see it starts to green and it basically just gradients across to red and then back to green and so forth. That's the gradient. The 3D effect takes each one and fades it to black within the bar. that can look particularly good on a roof line. The way they move across like that, they start to look like meteors or something rushing along the roof line. And then you've got highlight, and I have no idea what highlight does. What's highlight do? Oh, there you go. It draws a white line between the bars. Seriously, this is the best way to understand what an effect does, is put it on a matrix. This is a very dense matrix. This is 50 high by 100 long, and it gives you a really good idea of exactly what that looks like. And there was one other thing. I think that's it. All right, so that's the bars effect. The bars effect actually looks really good on arches, particularly if you set it to be left or right. To obviously get them moving, so it's a great way to do the jumps on arches. Remember last week we talked about turning it into a single line, and that way you get that sort of constant velocity of the bars moving along. When you render it the default, actually it's constant velocity even then. Okay, I wasn't expecting that. Maybe it was per preview. Oh yeah, so per preview is not giving you constant velocity. So you can see that as it falls down, it seems to accelerate and come back up again. So for those of you that haven't watched last week's video, go and watch that. We talk about a lot of these render styles and how the render styles can make a difference to how a particular effect comes out. The developer makes a decision when they build their model about what that default render style is going to be, and obviously for an arches model, the default render style is like it's a single line, as you can see. 3D also looks really good on arches as well. Same settings. This is one of the powers of XLight, is the fact that every effect just works on any model, and so we can take that same effect, throw it onto a tree. We can just change its direction or whatever, and it works just the same. Bars on a spinner is really interesting. So by default, so remember this is going up and down, and so by default it's behaving like it's going out along the arms of the spinner. That's because we're using the default. If you change it to per preview, obviously it would look very different. If you change it to single line, it'll look interesting. Oh, that's because it's down. Left, right. So it produces yet another different effect. That's one effect, different render styles. If we go back to default, on a spinner reorganizes everything as if all of these things were unraveled and the centers were all along the top row of a matrix. The outside ones were all along the bottom of a matrix. And so you get this spinning effect with the bars. Not the only way to do a spinner, but definitely a way to do it. So that's the bars effect. Any question on the bars effect before I move on? It's a very popular effect.
Anyone?
All good?
No, seems to be all good.
All right. Okay. All right. Butterfly, the staple effect. Everyone uses butterfly, but 90% of people seem to set in its absolute default mode, which looks pretty cool, but there's actually a lot of options here that you can set. So you can change the colors of the butterfly. So I can go up here and actually choose what colors I want to use. You don't just have to use the built-in rainbow. I'm going to change this back to, I don't know, it was yellow, it was blue. So yeah, you can actually change the palette that's used. You don't just have to use the default. There's also a bunch of styles here. It's not just the classic. Not sure I can tell the difference between that one. So it comes from the corner. It's more like a plasma type thing, some slightly different color styles, but basically the same thing. 10. It's a bit free. So yeah, there's a bunch of different styles. Then you have the concept of background chunks. So background chunks are basically colors that are emitted and left as black. And this just changes which ones or how many of them. So as you go up, everything becomes separated. So here, the first layer is separated by black, then it adds a second layer of black, a third layer, fourth layer, and a fifth layer, and so on. This does have a value curve associated with it, so if you really want to, you can change it over the course of the effect. I'm not sure that looks any better, but you can. Your background skip, I think that works with your background chunks, if I remember rightly. I have no idea. I obviously got it to work at some stage. I wouldn't have a value curve to it if I couldn't. Oh, okay. So you can see how background chunks is not working the way it did before. So the background skip and the background chunks is somehow controlling how those black bars appear in there. Again, I guess you've got to like black. I guess because the power of black is that when you have layers, colors will bleed through. So I guess that might be useful. And then you've got speed. You can actually change how quickly this thing moves across. And because it's got a value curve, you can make it accelerate and decelerate. Direction lets you change whether it appears to go from the bottom left or from the top right. And that's about it for the butterfly. Like I say, 90% of people seem to use the absolute default image. It looks good on a lot of different models. It looks great on a tree. And on a spinner, it just gives you that rainbow colored effect, which looks pretty cool. So that's a bit of a staple. Then we've got circles. So circles, in your current release, circles has a bug in it. So that was my fault. I broke it. So circles just puts a bunch of circles on and moves them around. It's pretty straightforward. If I go back to layout, let me add a whole house model down here. Put everything in it. So circles is one of these ones that actually I find works really well on a whole of house. I mean, it's probably not as effective because of the models, but if you really pump the circle size up, it can look like a set of spotlights crawling across your house in different colors. Right, revealing various elements of your display. So I quite like that. Let's go back to our matrix. Number of circles. So here you can decide whether you just want the one circle moving around or you want to have several. There's a value curve there. So again, you can start with one and then have them multiply. They all start to appear and disappear. It resets. You can have the size change. So you can start with 2, but set a ramp. So now the circles are growing over the course of the effect. Of course, you don't just have to ramp it. You can do a sine wave like we showed you last week and make it grow and shrink. And then finally, you've got your speed, where you get to decide just how fast those balls fly around on your display. And again, with a value curve, it lets you make them accelerate and decelerate.
Okay, Benny's just asking whether you can change the shape.
Well, they wouldn't be circles if you could change the shape. Sorry, but no, you can't. There's not an equivalent squares or triangles or something else. But there are a couple of other things that can give you those shapes, just not this sort of effect. You can always raise a request. Send me a PM and I'll see if I can add it. It wouldn't be that hard, to be honest, if you desperately needed it. Bounce basically makes the borders cause the balls to bounce backwards and forwards. Radial, okay, that's interesting. So radial seems to cause it to just, the radius grows over the course of the effect. Plasma, you need the balls a little bit bigger for this, but yeah. So as they get close to one another, they kind of somehow seem to blend. I think you need more of them, maybe some different colors, and you get sort of blended circle type shapes, etc. Radial 3D. Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know. They don't seem to be. I don't know what that's meant to do. Bubbles makes them hollow, and linear fade makes them look like dots. Although, interestingly, the black seems to overlay the other bubbles, which is a little unfortunate. I'm not sure why it does that. So yeah, so a couple of variations on your circles. That's the circles effect. Color wash. Okay, so look, circles is not hugely popular compared to the other effects we've gone through. Color wash is. Color wash basically cycles through the chosen color. I've chosen white, red, and green. And so over the course of the 5 seconds, it starts white, turns red, and then finally turns green, fading between. It only does it the once during the 5 seconds because this is set to 1. If you set it higher, then it will change a lot quicker. The value curve lets you start off slow and then accelerate it through the colors if you wanted to. Vertical fade. Interesting. No idea what that's trying to do. Okay, it seems to be working only on one string. I'm not sure how that's useful. Maybe it was in the past, I'm not sure. Horizontal fade, okay. That looks to me, oh there, oh okay. I wonder why that worked differently then. Okay, so to me that's a bug. All right, write that one down, Ben. That should clearly spread itself all the way across the model. I have no idea why it only does the first column. Because the horizontal fade does it, fading in and out across the edge of the model and top to bottom. So I imagine that's what the vertical fade's meant to do. I reckon that's a defect. Shimmer. Shimmer just causes it to flash on and off while it goes through. So basically every second frame is black and every other frame is going through that color change. Shimmer is something that was quite popular, I believe, on the LOR controllers, and so there's a few things around that talk about shimmer. Circular palette, if we take this back down to 1, sorry, you don't just use the sliders too, most of them let you actually go in and edit the effect setting. So you can see previously, so when I don't have a circular palette, it starts white, goes red, finishes green. When I say circular palette, it starts white, goes red, goes green, and then goes back to white again. And that's what a circular palette is. Okay. And I think that's it for the color wash. That's quite a popular effect, particularly as a background. You can also use the color wash as a mask. If you start at white and fade to black, then you can use it as a fading mask or something, or with other effects in a layer. Then we've got curtain. I have no idea who uses this. That's actually not true. Some people do like to use this as a reveal mask, but yeah, I don't think just as a straightforward curtain, it's all that popular. So here you get to decide whereabouts the curtain edge is, whether it's left, right, etc., and which way it's moving. The effect, here it's opening, now it's closing. If you open then close, then obviously it runs twice as fast because it has to do 2 crosses. The swag width controls just how curved it is on the end. So if you make that 0, you can see how this is a bit of a, you could use this as a reveal mask if you just set it to white. Then you could just use it to swipe something off or swipe something on. Although you saw last week that there are actually transitions that will do that a lot better these days. But yeah, it is commonly used for that sort of thing. You can change the swag width, make it much more curved or much less curved. And then you've got the speed, which is just how quickly it swipes on and off. This is an unusual effect. Normally, the effect runs for the whole duration of the time that you drop it. But if you set the swag speed really quickly, you can see it's not taking 5 seconds to go off. So effectively it rushes off and then does nothing for the rest of the duration. That's quite unusual. If you click repeat, of course, it will do the same thing to fill the 5 seconds before it resets. So like I said, I don't think a lot of people would be using curtain for anything else other than as a mask on some other effect. But hey, you can use it. DMX. So I happen to know DMX is actually changing right now. Gil was working on this one today. Without an actual thing to control, this is kind of hard to explain. But basically, conceptually here, this gives you 9 direct channels that you can control. So if you had a moving headlight and channel 1 controlled how far rotated it was, you could set exactly how far rotated you want it to be at that particular point in the DMX. And while this effect is up, that's the value that would be sent to that rotating light to tell it where to go. That's of limited use. Obviously, it means you either need to put hundreds of these things, setting things to all different values, or you have to use things like on effects and the like to emulate ramps and the like. One of the things that Gil's playing with right now is adding value curves to all of these things, which will give you much finer grain control over the way in which you control DMX things. The other thing that can be a little bit confusing here for people is that the way you have to set the model up. I'm not going to try and explain it. I think you're better off. Oh, actually, it does have ramps here, so you can set up ramps, and it means it'll ramp up to that value rather than just sending a single value. I believe Gil has a video on how to use the DMX effect. Maybe next week I'll pull together a bunch of links for you and show you where to find Gil's videos, where to find Sean's videos. And there's a few other guys in the States that occasionally put out useful videos as well that I'll point you at. So yeah, DMX, very hard to demonstrate because there's absolutely nothing to see on the screen. It really requires, it really requires you to actually have some element that you can control. Faces effect, not going to go into that to a great deal. The faces effect is designed to control either a matrix and put a face on a matrix. I use it in my display to display a snowman that sings a song. But it will also control things like things, Coro faces. It'll control pixel faces, either dumb pixels or 2811 type pixels. But you've got to set your model up properly in order to make this work. You also have to do your Papagayo import. So if there's enough interest, if people really want me to go through Papagayo and everything else next week, I'm happy to do so. Like I said, there are some really good videos out there on how to do it. But you look, I'm happy to spend time on it if people watch the videos and then struggle with it. Otherwise, to be honest, you're probably better served by watching those videos to see how it works. Okay, then you've got the fan. I believe this is one of the sort of superstar-ish type effects. These effects are really cool, particularly on a tree. The thing I find most challenging about them is when you've got a whole house model, they often struggle to fully reach the edges of your display, which is a little bit frustrating when you're trying to create the effect across the whole house. But on a tree particularly, these things can look quite spectacular. So let's talk about the various settings. They're actually quite well designed to have multiple of them on a tree. So here you can control the center. So let's put it back up on our matrix because that's easier to see. So you can move it left and right across your matrix. So if you want to put another one on, or 3 or 4 of them on, just create several layers, drop them on, move their X and their Y coordinates around, and they'll look great. Let's put it back in the middle. Okay, radius 1 is the center radius, so it doesn't change the outside radius of the object. Set at 0, the arms appear to come out from the center. The angle, if I remember rightly, controls how twisted they appear, I think. Ooh. Okay. Okay, we've got radius 1 and radius 2. So I think, yeah, so you can see how it's revealing itself in the light. That's all got to do with these radius 1s and 2s. And now I'm not sure why it's what it is. Right, so you can tell if you click on an effect, it always goes back to its first frame. So you can see that radius 1 appears to be its start radius, which is quite small. So let's set it to, I don't know, it's 43. Let's set that one up to 43 as well, and hopefully it'll stay the same. Okay, that didn't work very well, did it?
And Bruce is asking, is there a reset button on the effect so they go back to a...
No, there's not. There should be, but there's not. There's not, because yeah, you're right. I have no idea how to reset it. Revolutions controls how fast it spins. That much I can tell you. I don't know if Gil's going to add value curves to this. There's a number of these that it would make sense to do so, but I think Gil's in two minds about it. So I'm leaving it to him to decide what he does. Number of blades obviously changes the number of blades coming out on the fan, and the width controls the size of each blade. So set to 100, each blade almost touches each other. The angle Yeah, so this angle seems to be controlling how twisted the fan blades are. It's got positive and negative, so you can change whether it spins back anti-clockwise or clockwise. And number of elements actually subdivides each blade into more than one blade. So here you've got 3 together. Finally, you have width, which can slim them down. Let's get that back to 1. So you can see how it's made the blade really thin, and here the blade's reasonably wide. And then duration. Okay, so if you look over here, you can see how this moves as I move this slider. I think that's got to do with how it grows out or shrinks down. So here it's 50-50. So it comes out, and then it's the middle part spins out, and that then plays with these radiuses and angles. I know, I think I probably should have read the manual on this one before I tried to explain it, because I'm not doing a very good job. So this duration here seems to control how much of its time it spends expanding versus how much time it expends exploding out to the edge of the effect at the end. And acceleration obviously changes how the speed changes over time during the effect. Reverse obviously does exactly the opposite, I would imagine. The blend edges gets rid of that 3D-ish type effect, and it looks a lot harsher. Oh, reverse seems to have turned it around. So there the blades are going clockwise. That's clockwise, and that's anti-clockwise. So it's obviously changing how it spins. Yeah, there's no reset option, and as we've said before, if I go and grab the fan effect again and drop it again, it actually copies the settings, which means it's actually quite hard to reset it without closing and reopening it. I don't think there's an easy way to do it. Maybe that's one of those questions I should ask the guys about, exactly how they feel we should go about doing that. I got to say, once you get used to most of the effects, you end up playing with them until you get something you like at any rate. If you do find a set, so if you do get something like this, let's say, that you like, and say, actually, I kind of like that effect, you can set it as a preset. So you right-click on the effect you like, you say, I'm going to give that a new reset. That's my RGB fan. And save it. And then I can come over to here and say, go to Effect Presets again and say, actually, there it is. I want to apply that preset. Didn't work. Why did that not work? Should be able to apply that preset onto that model. Another thing I need to look into, Ben. But there is this concept that you can save a set of settings that you like on an effect, and then you can reuse it later, again and again, and maybe slightly tune it, etc., which somewhat mitigates the problems of these things getting quite confusing.